بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful.
What is Quranism and who are the Quranists? Quranism or Qur'āniyya, or so-called al-Qur'āniyya in Arabic, is a form of Islam sometimes known as Quran-only Islam or Quranic Islam. It believes that traditional religious clergy have contaminated religion and that Islamic counsel should only be based on the Quran, thereby rejecting the Hadith literature's religious authority. Quranists think that the Quran is already comprehensive and clear, and that it can be comprehended without the use of other literature. Quranists argue that the vast bulk of Hadith literature is false, and that the Quran itself rejects Hadith in both technical and general terms. In terms of faith, jurisprudence, and legislation, Quranists vary from Sunnis and Shias who, in addition to the Quran, regard the Hadith, scholarly opinions, the opinions of the Sahaba, the Imam, and the key is to be Islam's legislative authority in matters of law and creed. Each Hadith espousing sect of Islam has its own unique collection of Hadith on which its Muslims rely, but these collections are rejected by other sects, whereas Quranists reject all Hadith collections and have none of their own. This methodological difference has resulted in significant differences in theology and legislation, as well as comprehension of the Quran, amongst Quranists, Sunnis, and Shia. Sunni and Shia Muslims, according to Quranists, have altered the meaning of the scriptures to promote their own agendas. Most Quranists refer to themselves simply as Muslims. However, other terms used include Quranic Muslims and submitters to God. Other sects refer to them as Quranists or Qur'āniyya in Arabic, as well as reformist or progressive Muslims, though Quranists themselves often reject these labels. Quranists believe that God's word in the Quran is plain and complete as it is, and that it may be fully grasped without the use of outside sources. They claim Quranic verses such as 638, 12:111, 1689, 7:185, 7750, 6837, 45:6, and 6:114 to justify their belief. They believe the Quran is plain and complete, and that it may be fully comprehended without the aid of Hadith and Sunnah. As a result, they interpret the Quran using the Quran itself. Which means the Quran can be understood by using a literal and thorough examination of the text, by applying the exegetical principle, explanation, or critical interpretation of a text, and a jurisprudential principle, the study, knowledge, or science of the Quran, without referring that Quranic usage through the lens of history and tradition. In other words, in order to understand the meaning of the Quranic verses, the Quranists are using the principle of Tafsir al-Qur'an by al-Qur'an. It means that the Quran can be explained by using the Quran itself. This is done by finding the same word in other Quranic verses, and make comparison between those verses that contain the same word, because maybe in the first verse, the word or the meaning of the verse is not that clear. However, in the second verse that contains the same word, it can further explain in more details about the word and the meaning of the earlier verse. In addition, the Quranists are also using the logical and critical thinking in order to explain the meaning of the Quranic verses, without the need to refer to other sources outside of the Quran, such as referring to the Hadith, Fatwa, or other religious tradition. This approach of Quranic interpretation is totally in opposition to the Tafsir by al-Masih method used by most Sunni and Shia exegetes, by interpreting the Quran with narrations, such as using the Hadith. For the Sunni and Shia, or so-called the traditionalist Islam, the Quranic verses cannot be interpreted alone, without the use of the Hadith. For them, every Quranic verses must be accompanied by the Hadith, and only through Hadith, that further explain the Quran, can the correct meaning of the Quranic verses can be understood. In their arguments against the traditionalist Islam, Quranists use the verses from the Quran itself, in order to support their claims that the Quranic verses can be interpreted alone, without the need of using other sources, such as the Hadith, in order to explain and understand the Quran. We will go in further details about these Quranic verses that support the claim by the Quranists in another video. Furthermore, Quranists did not believe in naskh, a ruling whereas a revelation or wahyu can be supersede or canceling each other for generations after Muhammad's death. Durar ibn Amir, a Kufan scholar, denied the al-Masih ad-Dajjal, punishment of the grave, and Shafa'ah in the 8th century due to his Quranist beliefs. In the early 20th century, Egyptian scholar Muhammad Abu Zayd's Quranist commentaries led him to deny belief in the Isra and Mi'raj. He asserted that verse 17:1 was an allusion to the Hijra rather than Isra and Mi'raj in his rationalist Quran commentary released in 1930, which employs the Quran itself to interpret the Quran. While the Quran remained socially relevant, Sayyid Ahmad Khan contended that relying on Hadith would limit the Quran's great potential to a specific cultural and historical circumstance. The extent to which Quranists reject the Hadith and Sunnah varies, although the more established groups have heavily criticized the Hadith's authority and reject it for a variety of reasons. Quranists argue that Hadith is not referenced in the Quran as a source of Islamic doctrine and practice, that it was not written down until a century after Muhammad's death, and that it contains internal flaws and contradictions, as well as discrepancies with the Quran. For Sunni Muslims, the Sunnah, or the Prophet's method, is one of the two fundamental sources of Islamic law. While the Quran contains verses urging Muslims to obey the Prophet, however, the Quran never mentions that the Sunnah in relation to Muhammad or to the other previous prophets. The term Sunnah appears multiple times in the Quran, notably in the phrase Sunnatullah, the path of God, but not in the phrase Sunnatul al-nabi, the way of the Prophet, which is commonly used by Hadith proponents.